Hey y'all, it's your battle buddy Darrin. Just got back from my Men in Momentum group, and I must say I was certainly moved by the group again this morning. We are in James 4 today, and it's really interesting when we talk about pride and not becoming a friend of this world. It's amazing to see, because where we live down here in Orange Beach is like one of the finest places in all the planet. People down here, a lot of us have everything that we could ever want, and it's very easy, as C.S. Lewis says, that we often don't think of God, and we don't think of improving ourselves spiritually when things are going really well for ourselves, but rather we look to God when things are not going well. And so the thing that's so cool about this Men in Momentum group is that these guys most of them are probably multimillionaires, but yet there's such a humility amongst them, and it's just wonderful. So I wanted to talk about pride and humility today. And let me start by putting something to you the way Charles Murray first presented it to me. I saw it on a lecture that he gave. He said that there's a big difference between self-esteem and self-respect. For the last 50 years or so, education has really focused on building self-esteem in the emerging generations. And what we're coming to find out is that was a really big mistake. And really what we've done is we've created a bunch of narcissists and a bunch of people who have this puffed up notion of themselves that they're good enough just as they are, and they're entitled to all of the world's riches. And so he says the best way to describe it is that when we say someone has too much self-esteem, we know exactly what kind of guy we're talking about, right? But when we say someone has too much self-respect, there's something wrong there. It just doesn't quite fit. How can someone have too much self-respect? Well, there is a way that self-respect can become sinful, but self-esteem is most often just another mask of pride. And so I want to delve into these things today. And let me start by pointing out, first of all, that a man does need a healthy amount of self-esteem, enough confidence, enough love in himself to really do anything. A person who is truly self-loathing is in real trouble. And this is why we're told to love our neighbor as ourselves. We do have to have enough self-esteem to be able to build the self-respect that we need in order to move through life. But as C.S. Lewis would say elsewhere, that the man who's really trying to become a better man, he is the one that is fully aware of how much sin remains in him. Whereas the person who feels really good about himself is not working on himself, is usually very happy with who he is. And so, but let me start, because like I said, we started today with James 4, and I won't read the whole chapter, but the first paragraph in particular is important. This is from James, Jesus' brother. He says, "Those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and you do not have it, so you commit murder, and you covet something that you cannot obtain. So you engage in disputes and conflicts. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly, in order to spend what you get on pleasures. Adulterers, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you suppose that it is for nothing that the scripture says, God yearns jealousy for the spirit that he has made to dwell in us? Our God is a jealous God. He wants us for himself. He's not an envious God. There's a big difference between jealousy and envy. Envy is wanting what someone else has. God does not envy us. He is jealous for us. God yearns jealously for the spirit that he has made to dwell in us. But he gives us all the more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning, and your joy into dejection. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. So, what I really brought you here for today is because C.S. Lewis is, of course, one of my favorite theologians, Christian apologists, and scholars. He may have brought more people in the 20th century back to Christ than anyone else. And it is this book, Mere Christianity, which actually was a series of lectures initially that he gave during World War II to the British public, that became perhaps the greatest Christian book of the 20th century. And I love the fact that he calls it Mere Christianity, because these are things on which theologians from all denominations can agree. But C.S. Lewis makes the point that, and he's not the first one, that pride is paradoxical. And so is humility, because man is paradoxically never more prideful than when he feels he's being genuinely humble. So this becomes very difficult, and this is why I brought up the difference between self-respect and self-esteem initially. It's because these things are often intertwined, but very difficult to disentangle. So, but he says somewhere else, I can't remember where he says it, that pride is like having bad breath. Everybody else knows you have it except the person that has the bad breath. And so, but furthermore, C.S. Lewis understands that pride is kind of the mother of all the other sins. And so in one of his chapters, and I hope I can find it here in time, he calls it the great sin. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this chapter to you. He goes, I come now to that part of Christian morals where they differ most sharply from all the other morals. There is one vice which no man in the world is free of, which everyone in the world loathes when he sees it in someone else, and which hardly any people except Christians ever imagine that they are guilty themselves. I have heard people admit that they are bad-tempered, or that they cannot keep their heads about girls or drink, or even that they are cowards. But I don't think I have ever heard anyone who was not a Christian accuse himself of this vice of pride. And at the same time, I have very seldom met anyone who was not a Christian who showed the slightest mercy to it in others. There is no fault which makes a man more unpopular, and no fault which we are more unconscious of in ourselves. And the more we have of it in ourselves, the more we dislike it in others. The vice I'm talking of is pride, or self-conceit, and the virtue opposite to it in Christian morals is called humility. You may remember when I was talking about sexual morality in a chapter earlier, I warned you that the center of Christian morals did not lie there. Well, now we have come to the center. According to the Christian teachers, the essential vice, the utmost evil, is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. Does this seem to you to be exaggerated? If so, think it over. I pointed out a moment ago that the more pride one had, the more one disliked pride in others. In fact, if you want to find out how proud you are, the easiest way is to ask yourself, how much do I dislike it when other people snub me, or refuse to take any notice of me, or shove their oar in, or patronize me, or show off? The point is that each person's pride is in competition with everyone else's pride. It is because I wanted to bring the big noise at the party that I am so annoyed that someone else was the big noise. Two of a trade never agree. Now, what you want to get clear is that pride is essentially competitive. It's competitive by its very nature, while all the other vices are competitive only, so to speak, by accident. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. And it's so interesting because, so many people live on that plane where they're merely in that ego comparative mode. They can never take joy in other people's successes. They can never take joy in other people's virtues or their luck, because it is constantly they're comparing their store of value, whatever that might possibly be, against other people's. So it is competitive. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good looking, but they're not. They are proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. If everyone else became equally rich or clever or good looking, there would be nothing to be proud about. It is the comparison that makes you proud. The pleasure of being above the rest. Once the element of competition is gone, pride is gone. This is why I say pride is essentially competitive in a way that the other vices are not. The sexual impulse may drive two men into competition if they both want the same girl. This is such a great chapter on mimetic theory too, but I won't get into that. Someone needs to put the mimetic spectacles on C.S. Lewis and do the whole dissertation. But the sexual impulse may drive two men into competition, may turn them into rivals if they both want the same girl. But that is only by accident. They might just as likely have wanted two different girls. But a proud man will take your girl from you, not because he wants her, but just to prove to himself that he is a better man than you. Greed may drive men into competition if there is not enough to go around. But the proud man, even when he has got more than he can possibly want, will try to get still more just to assert his power. Nearly all those evils in the world which people put down to greed or selfishness are really far more the result of pride. Take it with money. Greed will certainly make a man want money for the sake of a better home, better holidays, better things to eat and drink, but only up to a point. What is it that makes a man with $10,000 a year anxious to get $20,000 a year? Is it not the greed for more pleasure? 10,000 will give all the luxuries that any man can really enjoy. He wrote this, by the way, back in it would have been 1943, I think is when this came out. So, and this is also a really great argument for why we need to have stable dollars. We need to have species currency that is pegged rather than something that, this is where poor Milton Friedman got it wrong and the rest of the monetarists. So, is it not greed that for more pleasure, $10,000 will give all the luxuries that any man can really enjoy? It is pride, the wish to be richer than some other rich man, and still more the wish for power. For of course, power is what pride really enjoys. There is nothing that makes a man feel so superior to others as being able to move them about like little toy soldiers. What makes a pretty girl spread misery wherever she goes by collecting admirers? The pretty woman syndrome. Certainly not her sexual instinct. That kind of girl is quite often sexually frigid. It is pride. What is it that makes a political leader or a whole nation go on and on demanding more and more? Pride again. Pride is competitive by its very nature. That is why it goes on and on. If I'm a proud man, then, as long as there is one man in the whole world more powerful or richer or cleverer than I, he is my rival and my enemy. The Christians are right. It is pride which has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. Other vices may sometimes bring people together. You may find good fellowship and jokes and friendship among drunken people or unchaste people, but pride always means enmity. It is enmity. And not only enmity between man and man, but enmity with God, to God. In God, you come against something which is in every respect immeasurably superior to yourself. Unless you know God as that, and therefore know yourself as nothing in comparison, you do not know God at all. As long as you are proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people. And of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. That's why it's almost always the person below you that is trying to tear you down. That raises a terrible question. How is it that people who are quite obviously eaten up with pride can say that they believe in God and appear to themselves very religious? I'm afraid it means that they are worshiping an imaginary God. They theoretically admit themselves to be nothing in the presence of this phantom God, but are really all the time imagining how he, the real God, approves of them and thinks them far better than the ordinary people. That is, they pay a pennyworth of imaginary humility to him and get out a pound's worth of pride towards their fellow men. I suppose it was of those people Christ was thinking when he said that some would preach about him and cast out devils in his name, only to be told at the end of the world that he had never known them. And any of us may at any moment be in this death trap. Luckily, we have a test. Whenever we find that our religious life is making us feel that we are good, above all, that we are better than someone else, I think we may be sure that we are being acted upon not by God, but by the devil. And remember, your affectionate Uncle Screwtape will tell you that the devil's favorite sin, the most delicious sin to those below, is spiritual pride. The real test of being in the presence of God is that you either forget about yourself altogether or you see yourself as a small, dirty object. It is better to forget about yourself altogether. It is a terrible thing that the worst of all vices can smuggle itself into the very center of our religious life. But you can see why. The other and less bad vices come from the devil working on us through our animal nature. But this does not come through, pride does not come through our animal nature at all. It comes direct from hell. It is purely spiritual. Consequently, it is far more subtle and deadly. For the same reason, pride can often be used to beat down the simpler vices. This is a really interesting part. Teachers, in fact, often appeal to a boy's pride, or as they call it, his self-respect, to make him behave decently. Many a man has overcome cowardice or lust or ill temper by learning how to think that these sins are beneath his dignity. That is, by pride. The devil laughs. He is perfectly content to see you becoming chaste and brave and self-controlled, provided all the time he is setting you up in your dictatorship of pride. Just as he would be quite content to see your chilblains or your little wounds be cured if he was allowed in return to give you cancer. For pride is spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. Before leaving this subject, I must guard against some possible misunderstandings. First, pleasure in being praised is not pride. The child who is patted on his back for doing a lesson well, the woman whose beauty is praised by her lover, the saved soul to whom Christ says, "Well done," are pleased, and they ought to be. For here, the pleasure lies not in what you are, but in the fact that you have pleased someone you wanted, and rightly wanted, to please. The trouble begins when you pass from thinking, "I have pleased him, all is well," to thinking, "What a fine person I must have been to have done it." The more you delight in yourself, and the less you delight in the praise, the worse you are becoming. When you delight wholly in yourself, and you do not care about praise at all, you have reached the bottom. That is why vanity, though it is a sort of pride, which shows most on the surface, vanity is that pride that shows on the surface, is really the least bad and the most pardonable sort. The vain person wants praise, applause, admiration too much, and is always angling for it. It is a fault, but a childlike fault, and even in an odd way, a humble fault. See all the paradoxes here? It shows that you are not yet completely content with your own admiration. You value other people enough to want them to look at you. You are, in fact, still human. The real black diabolical pride comes when you look down on others so much that you do not care what they think of you. Of course, it is very right and often our duty not to care what people think of us, if we do so for the right reasons, namely, because we care so incomparably more about what God thinks of us. But the proud man has a different reason for not caring. He says, why should I care for the applause of that rabble as if their opinion were worth anything? And even if their opinions were of value, am I the sort of man to blush with pleasure at a compliment like some chit of a girl at her first dance? No, I'm an integrated adult personality. All I have done has been done to satisfy my own ideals, or my artistic conscience, or the traditions of my family, or, in a word, because I am that kind of chap. If the mob like it, let them. They're nothing to me, unquote. In this way, real thoroughgoing pride may act as a check on vanity. For, as I said a moment ago, the devil loves curing a small fault by giving you a great one. We must try not to be vain, but we must never call in our pride to cure our vanity. Secondly, we say in English that a man is proud of his son or his father or his school or his regiment, and it may be asked whether pride in this sense is a sin. I think it depends on what exactly we mean by proud of. Very often in such sentences, the phrase is proud of means has a warm-hearted admiration for. Such an admiration is, of course, very far from being a sin, but it might perhaps mean that the person in question gives himself airs on the ground of his distinguished father, or because he belongs to a famous regiment. This would clearly be at fault. But even then, it would be better than being proud of being simply himself. To love and admire anything outside yourself is to take one step away from utter spiritual ruin. Though we shall not be well so long as we love and admire anything more than we love and admire God. Third, we must not think that pride is something God forbids because he is offended at it, or that humility is something he demands as due to his own dignity, as if God himself was proud. He is not in the least worried about his dignity. The point is, he wants you to know him, wants to give you himself. And he and you are two things of such a kind that if you really got into any kind of touch with him, you will, in fact, be humble. Delightedly humble, feeling the infinite relief for having once got rid of all that silly nonsense about your own dignity, which has made you restless and unhappy all your life. He is trying to make you humble in order to make this moment possible. Trying to take off a lot of that silly, ugly, fancy dress in which we have all got ourselves up and are starting about like the little idiots we are. I wish I had got a bit further with humility myself. If I had, I could probably tell you more about the relief, the comfort of taking the fancy dress off, getting rid of the false self with all its look at me and aren't I a good boy, and all its posing and posturing. To get even near it, even for a moment, is like a drink of cold water to a man in the desert. And finally, 4, do not imagine that if you meet a really humble man, that he will be what most people call humble nowadays. He will not be the sort of greasy, smarmy person who is always telling you that, of course, he is nobody. Probably all you will think about him, the truly humble man, is that he seemed a cheerful, intelligent chap who took a real interest in what you said to him. If you do dislike him, it'll be because you feel a little envious of anyone who seems to enjoy life so easily. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all. If anyone would like to acquire humility, I think, tell him the first step. The first step is to realize that one is proud. And a biggish step too, at least nothing whatever can be done before it. If you think you are not conceited, it means that you are conceited indeed. From C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, this is such a spectacular book.
And C.S. Lewis, as I mentioned, is one of my greatest heroes. In the previous video, I mentioned that it was he who brought me back from the spiritual wastelands back in 2008. I, of course, went on to his mentor, G.K. Chesterton, who C.S. Lewis said he thought was the most reasonable, brilliant man on the planet. And found that in many ways he is. I mean, Chesterton is on another level of depth. It's really amazing. But we're also very fortunate. I would say, some of you know that my favorite Austrian economist is the German Austrian economist who was exiled in Switzerland, Wilhelm Röpke. And Hitler called him his greatest economic enemy. But Hitler called his greatest theological enemy a fellow who I have come to admire perhaps above all, and that is Dietrich von Hildebrand. Dietrich von Hildebrand, to my mind, wrote what I think is the greatest book on Christianity, called Transformation in Christ. This book is all about the Beatitudes, and it is the very center of my ministry, if you want to call what I do a ministry. When I was a catechist in the Catholic Church, I was told that you gotta do the regular curriculum, but once you get done with that, you feel free to teach anything you want, Darrin. So I was teaching ninth graders doctorate level theology courses, and they were getting it. The Beatitudes are so amazing, and so this book is where philosophy, theology, and psychology meet. And I often say that the Bible is often creates more questions than it does answers. Like, I think it was Adler himself who said that if you read the 54 great books of Western civilization in order by yourself without anyone helping you, you are likely to become, at the end of it all, an incorrigible cynic. But if you have someone helping you and helping you understand what these guys are really talking about, what you'll come to identify is that they're kind of all written by the same hand almost, and they're moving centripetally towards this immovable center, an immovable center of truth that you can't really ever see head on. You can only catch it side glances at it, and if you ever try to shore up in it, you just can't see that kind of objective truth face on. We can't see God, the truth, the light, and the way. It's too bright for us. And so, anyhow, this book is very important to my life. And one chapter in particular, it was so good that they wrote this. They broke it out and put together this little book called Humility. And I would like to read to you. I'd like to read the whole book to you, but of course I can't. So what I'm going to read is the first chapter and the last chapter of this book. I will admit it ahead of time that this is much more difficult reading than C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote for the layman. He wrote for the everyman. He was trying to, particularly in Mere Christianity, was shore up people's faith in a time of war, when they were getting carpet bombed by the Nazis. Dietrich von Hildebrand, on the other hand, was called by the Catholic Church the doctor, the 20th century doctor of the church. And he was a disciple of Husserl, the phenomenologist. And so what you're going to get here is maybe a bit unapproachable for some, and if that's the case, just shut this video off or go back and re-listen to the C.S. Lewis part. And he begins, the epigram is Luke 14:11. Everyone that exalted himself shall be humbled, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. The first chapter of this it's a subchapter of the full book, but anyhow, humility is the antithesis of pride. Humility, as far as Francis de Sales has said, is the highest of all human virtues. For love, the consummation of all virtues, on which dependeth the whole law and prophets, is the divine virtue. Love is the divine virtue. What is true of love, that without it all the other virtues and good works are valueless, love is again, in another respect, true of what is true of love is also true of humility. For just as love embodies the life of all virtues and expresses the inmost substance of all holiness,
Humility is the precondition and basic supposition for the genuineness, the beauty, and the truth of all virtue. It is mater and caput, mother and fountainhead, of all specifically human virtues. For, inversely, pride or superbia is not only by itself our primal sin, it also inwardly contaminates all intrinsically good disposition and robs every virtue of its value before God. A consideration of pride, therefore, will help us better understand the nature and importance of humility. Pride is worse than concupiscence. Now, concupiscence is a consequence of original sin. It refers to the disordered desire for the sensual pleasures. So, if you have given yourself over to the sensual pleasures in life, you're giving yourself over to concupiscence. So, pride is worse than concupiscence. We have two great enemies to combat within us, pride and concupiscence. The two are mostly intertwined in some definite manner. Persons tainted by pride alone are seldom to be met with it. It is these two enemies that render us blind to value, but they are not of equal importance. It is not concupiscence, but pride that constitutes the primal evil in our souls. Satan's original gesture is an act of absolute pride that rebels against God, the embodiment of all values in an impotent attempt to appropriate his power and his dominion. Ye too shall be as gods, is the promise of the snake in the Garden of Eden. True, in the sinfulness of many men, indeed of most men, concupiscence plays a more conspicuous part, but nevertheless it falls short of being a primal evil. That is why in the Gospels, even the sin of impurity, however grave, is less severely judged than that of pride. Christ denounced pride and obduracy, stubbornness, in far more incisive terms than the sins of the flesh. Thus, pride is the deepest root of the malignancy within ourselves, which is entirely consonant with the fact that Adam's sin, too, consisted in an act of disobedience inspired not by concupiscence, which was only to be a consequence of the fall, but by pride. Humility conquers pride. The fact alone that pride is the primal source of all moral evil clearly demonstrates the paramount importance of humility. What is most essential is the process of dying unto ourselves on a daily basis. It is the conquest of pride, that liberation from oneself whose name is humility. On the degree of our humility depends the measure on which we shall achieve freedom to participate in God's life and make it possible for this supernatural life received in holy baptism to unfold in our souls. God resisteth the proud and give grace to the humble. James 4:6, as you know. On the other hand, every virtue and every good deed turns worthless if pride creeps into it, which happens whenever, in some fashion, we glory in our goodness. This is clearly set forth by the parable of the publican and the Pharisee in the gospel. Luke 18:10-14. Pride has many forms. There exist formally and materially distinct forms of pride, as humility represents an antithesis to every form of pride. A consideration of the various forms and degrees of pride will help us become aware of the various aspects of humility, each which expresses a negation of pride in one or another of its manifestations. Satanic pride hates goodness. Let us begin this survey of the types of pride with the worst and the most characteristic one, which we may call satanic pride. He who is afflicted with this kind knows one kind of satisfaction only, the glorification of himself. For him, the entire world is devoid of interest except insofar as it offers him an opportunity to experience his own superiority, power, and splendor. Subject to this spasm of ego, enslaved to his exclusive interests in the excellence of his self as such, he is unable to grasp the inherent beauty and the nobility of objective value. Satanic pride blinds. He is then blind to value. But his kind of value blindness is not that dull insensitivity to values which marks the slave of concupiscence. On the contrary, he does in a sense grasp that metaphysical force that resides in value, the majestic sovereignty proper to it. However, he grasps it in a way that implies at the same time its profound misconception. For, and herein precisely consists the value blindness, while he is aware of that character of compelling sovereignty inherent in values, he fails to see its essential nexus with their self-contained beauty, their objective significance independent of any utilitarian or decorative use in the service of an ego. Hence, it happens that his value blindness bears a tinge not of dull indifference, but of hostility. Values to him are a scandal. He fatally endeavors to alienate their sovereignty and transfer it to his own self. He fears them, these values, as a menace to his supreme glory, derived from his autonomous selfhood. The claim to submission which emanates from them, he meets with resentment and rebellion. He does not, as does the concupiscent man, content himself with ignoring values and turning a deaf ear to their call. He would, as it were, dethrone them. Again and again, he performs the impotent gesture, which is aimed at depriving them of their metaphysical power. That's why anytime you hear someone talk about the only permissible virtue is that of universal tolerance. Today in the world, there are a lot of people who want universal tolerance to be the only virtue because they don't want to have values and virtues. Today, the man that discerns the difference between good and bad, or furthermore, who can discern the difference between good and better, or yet better and best, or worse and worse, that man is the enemy to the person who believes in only universal tolerance, the leveler who wants to excuse everyone from the hard work of becoming the best version of themselves. So he would, as it were, dethrone these values. Again and again, he performs the impotent gesture, which is aimed at depriving them of the value's metaphysical power. Frequently enough, his endeavor takes the form of an attempt at enthroning some false value in place of the true ones. In certain typical cases, it is this mechanism of disguised pride which underlies the cult of idols. This attitude appears most clearly in the rebellion of Lucifer, who would enjoy to be like God. He shuts his eyes to the goodness and holiness of God. He fails to perceive the indissoluble union between all powerfulness and all goodness. He would separate omnipotence from all goodness and attribute the former to himself. All his thoughts are centered in one overwhelming consciousness of counting for much. I'm better than you, as Uncle Screwtape would say, of the covetous and resentful everyman. This yearning for self-supremacy is not satisfied by terrestrial power, by actual physical power as such. He also hungers for the possession of that metaphysical grandeur which is implicit in all possession of value. Yet to be sure, it is not for the sake of value as value that he covets it. What preoccupies him is that mysterious power without which he may not attain the plenitude of power, and which therefore irritates him as an irksome limitation imposed upon his pleasure in counting for much. Thus, original pride engenders a hatred of values, a combative opposition to whatever irradiates light to all self-contained glory, ultimately to God. Clearly, this attitude is tantamount to ethical evil in an eminent sense. It constitutes the utmost antithesis to the harmony of values and the extreme negation by a creature of his creaturely status. It represents the most express refusal to honor value by adequate response to its appeal. Yeah, this is a big thing with Dietrich von Hildebrand, is that we must honor value by giving it its due response, by responding adequately to the appeal of these higher values. Satanic pride isolates and it divides. By taking this position, man cuts himself off from the world and of values. Man cuts himself off from the world of values and its entirety. He will be incapable of all response to value, not so much as owing to his value blindness, as because he lacks the readiness for submission. Somewhere, I think it's actually in the introductory chapter of Transformation in Christ, he says that we must be like that stamp that seals the envelope. We must be the hot wax, and God can place his stamp on us. He can print the soul that he wants, that Christian soul, on us. So you got to have that readiness to submit to that stamp. And so value blindness of the man of pride lacks that readiness for submission that underlies all response to value. His value blindness will be the consequence, not the case, of his pride. It is therefore a blindness that involves a high degree of guilt. Also, pride determines a specifically grade form of obduracy or stubbornness. Its effects diametrically oppose those of love, which opens and melts the soul, and contrasts dramatically to the specific qualities of responsive kindness and luminous harmony, which love connotes. The proud personality is lacerated by a deep disharmony. A corrosive venom pervades his entire life, and all the gratification he derives from whatever flatters his pride is unable to provide him with any genuine inner happiness, any blissful peace. Satanic pride turns freedom into license. Another formal characteristic of satanic pride consists in the abuse of liberty. The gift of free decision, or free will, conferred upon man as a mark of his likeness to God, is granted him by the divine will so as to empower him to respond to values and to surrender to God in a way that carries the full sanction of his personality. In other words, it's like the lover's leap. I love you. I trust in you. It's a voluntary volitional activity that we make. We must participate in God's pull toward him. Under the sway of pride, that gift is perverted into a stimulus for his orgy of self-glorification and into nourishment for his consciousness of counting for much. Again, this is another huge theme. I want to count for much rather than, in the eyes of others. I want to have this ego comparative game where I can count my stuff. I have more of it than you have. Well, to God, that's not at all what counts the most. The basic fact of freedom, the dimension of being where we most possess ourselves and actualize ourselves, disjoined from the ordination to God and from its correlation with the world of values, becomes the source of an illusion of absolute power and of a primary claim to domination. Freedom is degraded thereby into arbitrary license. It's like Edmund Burke says, the intemperate man is never free because his passions forge his fetters. The truly free man is the one that has discarded all the sin and is able to that. And I always make this distinction, particularly when I'm giving a political talk. What is the difference between free will, freedom, and liberty? Free will is that inbuilt consciousness that we have, that we know we can make certain decisions. The thing about free will is that it's like free speech. It's really only good if we have something valuable to say. Okay. And we really are only exercising our free will if we truly understand what it is that we are doing. Freedom, let's say, distinguish freedom from free will. Freedom is, in its absolute sense, merely the the absence of restraint. A man lost in the desert, let's say, is free to do whatever he wants. He can curse the Lord, he can run this way, he can run that way, he can do whatever he wants. But he doesn't have very good options, okay? And this is why conservatives, political conservatives, in many ways stand in direct opposition with the libertarians or the libertines. Because we know that in order for a society to become good, it's not just about freedom, following freedom as the primary political value, okay, as it is for the libertarian. The libertarian thinks that the utmost and the most important political value is freedom with a capital F in its absolute, abstract, and perfect sense in a way that has never existed on this planet. To the conservative, liberty, on the other hand, is the array of good options that become available to us when freedom is balanced with order. Order, as Russell Kirk will tell you, as Edmund Burke will say, is the first need of the soul. And it's not only the first need of the soul of the individual, but it's also the first need in a social order, in a good society. And so, anyhow, back to, you do these tangents all day long and I'll end up over my time limit. But the basic fact of freedom, the dimension of being where we most possess ourselves and actualize ourselves, disjoined from its ordination to God and from its correlation with the world of values, becomes a source of illusion of absolute power and of a primary claim to domination. Freedom is thereby degraded into arbitrary license. License, I hear when they scream for freedom. In certain conditions, the man governed by pride will commit this or that action, not because it satisfies its cupidity or even his pride, so far as its material import goes, but as a mere confirmation and exercise of his independence, a test of the position of power he derives from his gift of free will. This is the horrible sin of Krylov, the lonesome atheist in Dostoevsky's Possessed, which is, of course, one of my absolute favorites. Of course, I love everything that Dostoevsky has written, but the Possessed is really, really brutal when it comes to understanding the evil of pride in men's hearts. Whereas Crime and Punishment might be, the dalliance of sin in its worst form. It is essentially a book about conscience. That the man is, Raskolnikov is crippled by his his guilty conscience, and eventually his redemption at the end. So, this is the horrible sin of Krylov, the lonesome atheist in Dostoevsky's Possessed. They may mention it here, who, according to the deliberate plan, shoots himself at the moment convenient for the purpose of a gang of nihilistic scoundrels, not in order to promote their revolutionary designs, but to prove his absolute liberty unrelated to any concrete aim or value, the meaningless of death, and the non-existence of God. Here is a key to many an evil deed which apparently lacks any motivation. And this is what we're seeing now more and more. As we lose contact with God, we are seeing the kinds of nihilistic sins and instead of random acts of kindness, we are just seeing random acts of violence in its most terrifying form. And so often this kind of pride leads to this kind of nihilism. Here we have a key to many an evil deed which apparently lacks motivation, since by virtue of its contents, it cannot possibly offer its perpetrator any subjective satisfaction, not even a wholly illicit one. Satanic pride refuses all submission as such. Apart from his antagonism toward the world of values and his serene harmony, the maniac of pride repudiates all submission as such. His "I will not serve" is meant to challenge all authority. He will bow neither to man nor to God. This specific mode of pride, with its quality of supreme malice, may of course appear in various degrees. It may take hold of a person completely so that he is no longer able to evoke any response to value and becomes a prey to total value blindness. Lucifer is the prototype of this absolute pride. By analogy, we may class him with Cain, as well as the figure Raktin in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. There is also a category of men, which is probably the greatest book ever written. That's not the Bible. Although I really must say that I love The Idiot. It's one of my favorite Dostoevsky's. That's the one where you have this Christ-like figure as the protagonist, but all the variety of women. If you want to try to understand women, when of course that book should be about this thick, Dostoevsky's The Idiot is really just a wonderful exploration of the different kinds of women out there. There is also a category of men who are filled with this form of pride in part only. Their pride is similar in nature but restricted in extension. These would recognize and esteem certain sets of values, such as justice or faithfulness, for instance, and others not explicitly impinging upon their ego worship or their sense of grandeur, but these people refuse to take cognizance of and respond to values like humility, meekness, or mercy. Such men are partially afflicted with value blindness, nor do they lack a conditional readiness to submission. What shocks them is not the intrinsic importance of values as such, but only the claim inherent in certain high values, which, by virtue of their particular nature, imply a specific negation of pride and invite men to relinquish it altogether. Values of this order, and not the others, evoke such men's antagonism. Of course, whenever men of this type do display a response of values, it always remains a conditional one, and therefore mutilated and impaired in its quality. Response to value is fundamental to humility. Humility is first an antithesis to all metaphysical pride of the kind just described. In the humble man, the basic attitude of responsiveness to value, it has the whole field. In other words, your soul is wide open to value wherever you find it. Truth and goodness, wherever you find it, your soul is open to it. That's the humble man. He is not dominated at all by the desire of absolute power or counting for much. He grasps the objective meaning of values in its independence from the pursuits of the subject and honors these values with an unhampered and adequate response. Let your yes be yes. The readiness to posit that submission or surrender which belongs to every response to value is presented in him. He is concerned with the glory not of his own ego, but of the objectively important, of that which pleases God. The inward nobility of good, its intrinsic beauty, touches his heart and delights him. In his devotion to good, he participates in the harmony of values. His soul is bright and serene, free from the corrosive poison that eats the heart of the proud. True, all this he has in common with everyone in whom the fundamental attitude of response to value has acquired prevalence. That is to say, with everyone who has awakened to a life in the light of moral consciousness. Not humility alone, but also every response to value and every virtue forms an antithesis to metaphysical pride, which is the stem of moral evil. Opposition to this original pride equally underlies justice, veracity, faithfulness, and even purity, although the opposition specific to the latter is directed towards concupiscence. For all these virtues derive from a value responsive central attitude. They all presuppose awareness of value and the readiness to surrender to value and to submit to its demands. Hence, the antithesis to pride is in this sense, Hence, the antithesis to pride in this sense reveals to us only that element of humility which is alive in all virtue, which constitutes an aspect of the value response pure and simple. It manifests humility insofar as humility is the basis of all values. It does not, however, enable us to grasp the nature of humility in its narrower and specific sense. In the latter, more elements are required than have been described above, and we shall see this presently, having considered further types of pride. I think I'll leave that last chapter for another time. But just remember that you're really on the road up the mountain when those scales of pride fall from your eyes and you become alive, awakened after you've had that metanoia, after you've had that turning, after you've had that falling and hitting rock bottom. The only place to look is up. Then your heart and soul can be open to the higher things, the hidden things, the things that you couldn't see before because you were only consumed with yourself. Remember, as C.S. Lewis said, you got to get rid of that pride. And when you do, there are far better things ahead than anything you leave behind. God bless you all. Love one another.